When I joined the society, which was a while ago, I think in the 90s, there have been several bus tours that were taken to travel along the O&W to show where things were, station sites, yards, remnants of water tanks, et cetera, et cetera. And we came up with this idea that it might be fun to do a virtual bus tour because we have a lot of members that don't live in the area, may not get out here, but we're still interested in seeing what was left of the O&W. So the virtual bus tour was born in 1997, and it's still on the website. And basically what happened was Ross, my son at the time, was 9 years old. He and I got in a car, and we started in Cornwall and drove all the way to Cadocia. And we photographed as much as we could find that we found interesting. And then we came back a year later, and we started in the Summitville area and went up to Kingston. That was a shorter trip. So what you're going to see here are scans of the slides that I shot back then. Not all of these slides wound up in the virtual bus tour. So there's some things here, you could call this the director's cut, some things that did not wind up in the bus tour. So I've been fascinated with the O&W for years, starting when I was a lot younger. Let me minimize this window here. In 1962, I became part of an extended family after my father remarried, and my grandparents had property in Fallsburg, New York. And the Port Jervis Monticello and Port Jervis branch ran right behind the property. Well, right behind. It was about a mile hike back to it. And we would hike across it, and older family members would say, "Oh, that's the old O&W." Well, what do you mean the old O&W? Well, that was a railroad. Well, at the time, I was 9 years old. I was fascinated with the concept, but that was the railroad, and what happened to it? Well, it went out of business. I didn't think that railroads could go out of business. And I said, "You mean there were tracks here?" Yep, there were stations here too. And older family members, including my stepmother, had ridden the trains to places like Hartwood, Highview, St. Joseph's, Gilman Station, and Monticello stations. So when I joined the O&W Society back in the 1990s, I came across the old bus tour guides from earlier trips. And Ross was developing an interest in old railroads at the same time. Those of you who have been to Steamtown, if you made it into the roundhouse where what they call the orientation film runs, we both worked on that. You will see Ross in there as a young me, and you will see me as me at my chronological age, working on the Lackawanna and the East Broad Top. So he was gung-ho to do this, road trip. I'm also a big fan of the DL&W. It's kind of hard to say which one I'm more of a fan of. I rode the DL&W Phoebe Snow in first grade class trip. I still remember that. And that was back in 1959, riding in the dining car. Also, after I got married in the early 80s, I ran out and I documented a lot of the DL&W right-of-way and yards and other railroads that ran across New Jersey before Conrail came in and scrapped a lot of these tracks. So seeing how quickly Mother Nature takes back what was hers once, I figured, the O&W is probably worth visiting again. And this would have been 40 years after abandonment. So we were going to start at Cornwall and work our way all the way up to Cadocia and explore some of the Port Jervis and Monticello branch. So we didn't get to all of it. And we maybe have bit off more than we could chew, but we did cover a lot of ground. And to paraphrase an old saying, the road to Cadocia is paved with good intentions. So here was the game plan. We'd start at Cornwall, head west to Cadocia. My late brother, was a planner and also a map collector, and he had copies of United States Geological Survey maps going back to the 1890s that he made big copies for us to pinpoint locations of track bridges and station sites. Very, very helpful. We didn't get photos of everything. If we saw a spike, we actually even found a switch lock and a couple pieces of coal are sitting out in my shed somewhere. Didn't bother to get photos after that, but anything that you could see that clearly was an O&W artifact. So again, many of these photos made it to the virtual bus tours, not all of them. And we were very surprised at how much of the right-of-way could still be found 40 years after abandonment, but maybe we shouldn't be surprised because I remember back in 1962 how much we could see, and that was 5 years after abandonment. And maybe 3 to 4 years after the tracks were pulled up. And we also had a few adventures along the way. So here's Ross and I standing outside our motel, wherever it was. As I said, he appeared in Steel and Steam, and that really lit a fire under him. He wanted to do it. He wanted to look at the old right-of-ways, try to find them, station sites, bridge footings, wade through water and bramble and poison ivy. And he got pretty good in the car driving along saying, hey, Dad, that looks like that was an old right-of-way. He'd spot a grade and say, yep, sure enough, there was a train that used to run there. So July 97, packed up the car, all our gear, my cameras, and we set off. Now, for those of you who don't know, the USGS, I used to have a lot of topo maps. The USGS actually has a copy of every map they have ever made, scanned and available on a site called Get Maps. Okay, and they're all digitized. So if you have a lot of maps and you want to get rid of them, you can get rid of them because these are all available online and they're available in high resolution format. Very helpful. So looking here, here's Cornwall. There's the yard, there's the turntable, and that was a coal dock, I believe, at one time. There's the West Shore taking off, and here is the O&W main line, following Wisner Creek, crawling up the hill, and there's the Firthcliffe Carpet Factory. And this road originally was Route 32. Route 32 has been moved, but it was 32 at the time. And the Ores Mill Trestle over Wisner Creek is right about here, which, as I understand, wasn't taken down until about 1962, 61, 62. So this rather boring looking photo is what's left of the little yard where the O&W departed from the West Shore tracks and began climbing up the hill to Firthcliffe. And the gates are standing approximately where the tracks ran. So in July of 97, it was a storage yard for semi-trailers and trucks. And there's the main line. This shed was built there, I'm sure, long after the railroad was gone. It was just a crumbling concrete driveway in 97. Shore Road parallels the right-of-way up the hill towards Route 9W, which is something you can see very easily on Google Maps today. Well, you gotta look hard, but here is where the right-of-way crossed 32. Ross spotted this by the Firthcliffe Carpet Mill, which the O&W served on the siding. It's about where Old Mill Street intersects Route 32. Most of the mill property has been torn down now. The New York Central was servicing the mill for a few years after the O&W was abandoned. All right, we're gonna move a little bit further, and we're looking south, timetable east from New York 94 towards the former site of Meadowbrook Station, which would be right about here somewhere. And way off in the distance is where the Newburgh branch crossed the O&W on a girder bridge. The highway bridge over the right-of-way was filled in 1980, but you can still find ties near here. So if you go to the old Route 94 next to the Meadowbrook and you follow the right-of-way north, which is direction westbound, you'll still see plenty of ties, and you'll see evidence that there are actually two tracks running there at one time. Now, a little bit further up in Denniston, this is where the O&W crossed Jackson Avenue, just north of here before curving to the west. And here, the right-of-way is maybe a mortar round distance from the Erie-Graham line. So we're looking south, timetable east. If you look really carefully on Google Earth, you can still spot the right-of-way. You can clearly see where it curves to the south and then back to the northwest after crossing Ores Mills Trestle. And it sort of disappears in the woods west of Meadowbrook, and then you can kind of see it reappear again. But it's very overgrown. And that section past Meadowbrook, I walked back there, that is just absolutely covered with brambles. You need a machete to get through it. Now we're going to go a little bit further west to Burnside. This is where the tracks cross Station Road. The right-of-way is now used for high-tension lines. A lot of you know that the Burnside station is still around, but it was moved from its original location. And when I was up here touring this with Ray Kelly a number of years ago during one of the conventions, he mentioned that people frequently stop at the station and want to take pictures, and the owner gets a little peeved about it. Lehigh-Hudson River crossed the O&W here with two interchange tracks forming a Y with the Lehigh-Hudson River main line. And we did some side trips. We scrambled up onto the Graham line But this is what the Lehigh-Hudson River right-of-way heading north to Maybrook looked like in 1997. You can tell that the tracks have not been gone for very long. It's pretty overgrown now. But back then, the ballast was in wonderful shape. The interchange for the Susie Q with the Graham line was moved just west of here. This is where these USGS maps come in real handy. Campbell Hall, which is still a sleepy little village, but a major rail hub. You had 5 different roads crossing here or using these tracks to access Maybrook Yard. So you have the New Haven, which is the central New England, the O&W, Lehigh, New England, the Erie. The New York Central would come down here too. And of course, just to the east of here was the Lehigh-Hudson River. So most of this trackage, aside from the Graham line and what's left of the Erie Montgomery branch, is gone. But during World War II, Maybrook was the busiest freight yard east of the Mississippi with as many as 70 tracks that were in operation. So we had to take a picture of the Montgomery branch, which is still in use. And if you're looking right here at these trees, that's where the O&W station stood. This is the O&W right-of-way. We're looking back towards the Otter Kill Country Club. So it's crossing from the right in front of us. The right-of-way course is very, very heavily overgrown now. So it's difficult to spot it unless you do some bushwhacking. A little bit further up, you see where the central New England, New Haven tracks diverged. And these tracks, of course, are heading up to Maybrook Yard. And this is the Erie Montgomery branch, still in place, still being used. I tried to describe to Ross just how big this yard was, and he was not impressed when he saw only one track running through it. And the fate of Maybrook Yard was sealed with the burning of the Poughkeepsie Bridge in 1974, but realistically, it was sealed before then, as a lot of the freight that was coming through here was being rerouted to Selkirk. So that was even after the Erie-Lackawanna merged in 1960. But Maybrook Yard basically was the stake through the heart. That's what killed it off. So again, the tracks are still in use to an industrial park just north of 84. But that's it. Now, this is a yellow freight yard that you may have seen in the news that yellow freight is filed for bankruptcy. So the yellow freight yard may be shut down, and I don't know what in the world's going to replace it. Maybe nothing will replace it. We're on Route 208, and we're looking at the New Haven tracks into Maybrook Yard. We're looking south from 208. So again, all these lines that went in here, the O&W, Lehigh, New England, Lehigh-Hudson River, New Haven, Erie, New York Central, coming down the Wallkill and going back up the Erie Montgomery branch. But again, this is our little side trip. He wanted to see it, so we saw it. Back to the O&W. This is the right-of-way just east of the Graham Line overpass, which the bridge was known as the O&W Bridge. So we're on Route 416 looking west, County Road 416. This today now is the access road to the Hamptonburgh Preserve, which we hiked back to a few years ago during the convention. And we were pleased to discover, as Ray pointed out, that there was a 3-track yard just east of here on the other side of 416. It's wide enough to support 3 tracks. So it may have been a staging area or additional sidings for trains going in and out of Maybrook. Now, you will not see this anymore. Okay, this single girder bridge was intact where the O&W crossed Slaughter Road at Stony Ford. Still scratching my heads all those years later why it wasn't scrapped, because it's a very low clearance here. Not very safe. I imagine if you came down here with a rather tall truck, you could be unpleasantly surprised. So the east abutment, the one over here, is still in place. Obviously, this is gone, and the west abutment is gone, and the road's been widened and it's been improved. So it looked pretty, rather primitive back in the day. And this is the Stony Ford Run. And there's the graffiti-ridden west abutment. There were no markings warning us about a low bridge clearance. So, and I've seen a couple other places many years ago driving in upstate New York. I saw several places where old ONW bridges were still in place, or at least the girder bridges were in place and had not been removed. Why? Maybe too expensive to move it, or I suspect, and Ray probably knows more about this than anybody, this was probably removed because it was a safety hazard and nobody would bother scrapping it. That's what it looked like up on top. Some people were using the right-of-way as a hiking trail, and I suppose they're running four-wheelers, but I don't know if I'd try to run a four-wheeler over this one girder. But just imagine that you're watching F units rolling across this bridge on their way to Middletown, just to the west. Of course, at this point, Ross is fascinated because now he's seen the right-of-way. Now he's seen bridge abutments, and now he's seen an original bridge structure, or part of a bridge structure. So we're now at the site of the Mechanicstown station on New York 92 Dunning Road. This is a vacant lot now. At least when I looked at it on Google Earth, there's nothing here. I don't know why. Those buildings seem to be in pretty good shape. But here's the right-of-way with the chain across it, looking back towards Stony Ford. And just the other side of me, to my back, is the Interstate 84, Interstate 86, New York 17 cloverleaf, which basically obliterated the right-of-way when it was constructed. And the ONW began a curve to the south just west of here to come into Middletown. So we are standing right about here, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, and the cloverleaf is right in here where the interstates intersect. So the railroad made a big dip down to the south to then curl north and go through Middletown. This is a very useful map. Back in 1943, the USGS did 1 to 3150, 31500 scale USG maps of almost everything along the ONW. I don't know if this is something to do with the war, because in a lot of cases, they didn't update these maps for years. They went back to 1 to 62,000 scale. So if you go on Get Maps, TopoView Get Maps, you can find this map, and it's great because it shows you all kinds of things. Here's the ONW yard. Here's the Erie on its way up, paralleling the Graham line to Howells. And you can also see a little siding that they ran into the state hospital. Here we are. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here at the station. This picture was taken in 1997. The tracks have a little polish on them, so they're still being used by Conrail and the Middletown of New Jersey. But otherwise, it's pretty quiet around here. A lot of crickets chirping, not much going on. But the building looked pretty good 40 years after abandonment. Now, we're going to go back in time a little bit. When I got out of graduate school, I convinced one of my friends who was sort of into railroads to take a long couple of day trips up through New York and eastern Pennsylvania and northwest New Jersey, and we went into Middletown. And we took this picture from just about the same spot in August of 1977. It was a rainy, chilly day. And this is when the nightclub was still here. So again, this is 1997. This is 1977. So building doesn't look a lot different. Not too worn down. And then we came back in 98 before we took off to go up the Kingston branch because the sky was just perfect for a photo like this. The semaphore was still in place. Building looked in great shape. Rails were a bit rustier, but the right-of-way, surprisingly, was cleared of vegetation. So if you look over here to the right of the tracks, all of a sudden, we're down to cinders and gravel, and here it's all grassy. So somebody was taking care of it. This is all burned down now. I mean, just really sad what happened to it, but this is what it looked like on the north side. And the building is still in pretty good shape. I mean, it was built with stone and brick. And I believe that is a slate roof. Somebody may be able to fill me in on that. This is where the big fire broke out almost 20 years ago. There are plans to rebuild and restore it. I saw that there was a grant of $1.8 million, which is probably a fraction of what it's going to take to rebuild this building. I have a local church I was a member of that place almost burned to the ground. It took us almost $2 million to rebuild it. So I think that it's going to take quite a bit more money to rebuild it, but it'd be nice if the archives could wind up. Here's the backside. Several businesses were using the building. It looked pretty spiffy. It was in nice shape, modern windows, air conditioning units. Somebody was trying to keep up the property, at least on this side. And the station platform and doors on the east side. Aside from graffiti, the doors, bricks, and stonework all look to be in good shape. A little bit of rust, but even the benches were holding up well, although no passenger trains had stopped here since the early 1950s. Somebody else has a mic on, is banging around there. I believe when I took this picture, this was in 1977. So this should be the first marker. And I understand that that was stolen or something happened to it. So a second plaque was placed there. But I think this is the one that was placed there in 1977. Here's the Adams Freight Building and a surviving telegraph pole with several cross arms. The Adams Freight Building is still standing. I have no idea who uses it. There's no indication of any plans to restore and reopen. It's probably just being used for storage. There's the front view of the building. You can see the vent installed over the entrance, an exhaust vent. And you still see railroad ties in front of the building. And they took a bunch of gravel and used it as a makeshift ramp to unload and unload items. Well, at this point, Ross is totally hooked. He's fascinated. Like, how could this station be here and nobody's using it? How could this freight building be here and nobody's using it? Gazoon wherever that was. All right, here's the old yardmaster's office, the entrance to Middletown Yard, just north of Wisner Avenue. The building was in good shape, but its function really wasn't obvious to anybody who didn't know anything about the railroad. The yard lay just to the right. So the surviving O&W track is flanked by the yardmaster's office, a historical marker that indicates it's a pretty busy place at one time. There were a few other customers along the old main line in 97, but it was pretty quiet. We didn't see any trains go by the entire time we were there. Now we'll go back in time, 20 years, and you can see it's a lot more overgrown compared to 97. Somebody has his mic on and is coughing. Just check, mute your mic, please. Thank you. So again, going back 20 years, everything is overgrown. The historical marker still there. It was being used as a Baptist church, but not here. In 1997 was not being used as a church. I'm not sure who was using it at the time, but at least they cleared up the right of way a bit. Now looking the other way, this is south across Wisner Avenue from the entrance to the O&W yards. And I believe that warehouse on the left was once served by the O&W. And there's a lumber and building materials company just to the left of the frame. And as far as I know, they are still taking shipments by rail, unless that's changed recently. But again, pretty quiet. Of course, this is all gone now. This is the Erecting shop. We've got a beautiful shot of it at sunset, all boarded up, sitting silently. Nobody was using it for anything. This was destroyed in the November 2020 fire, along with several adjoining structures. And those buildings that burned to the ground were being used as a sound stage and also as a warehouse operation. This is a side view of the Erecting shop and the shop complex at sunset. As an architect once said to me, these buildings had really good bones, meaning that they were built well, built very, very well, built to last. And it really was a tragic loss when they burned down in 2020. This is the car body shop in July of 97. It was being in use by a mechanical equipment firm. And of course, it was far enough away from the fire that it survived. I'm not sure who occupies it now. All right, let's head north out of the yard. And we are at the Sands Road crossing, highlights. This location is just north of the old yards, heading towards Crawford Junction and Fair Oaks. And then Middletown, New Jersey used this track to get to its connection with Conrail on the Erie Graham line. And here's the bridge abutments where the O&W crossed over the Erie Graham line. This is the second crossing of the two roads. The O&W went under the Graham line at Campbell Hall, and here it went over it. What's unusual here is that the O&W main was constructed before the Graham line, so the Graham line had to dig under it, put an overpass in. Of course, Ross is investigating it here. You can see the steel footings for the two bridges on either side. And this was a two-track line heading towards Fair Oaks. So we're looking west on the Graham line, timetable west on the O&W. Trains got up to a pretty good head of speed here based on what I've read in several books about the O&W as what they call the Fair Oaks Speedway. Now we shot this from a bridge. We're looking with a telephoto lens at those bridge abutments. You can see them right here. And this is the new connection that was put in for the Middletown and New Jersey to connect to Conrail. There was no connection between the O&W and the Graham lines. Any freight that would have been interchanged between the Erie and the O&W in this area would have taken place at East Main Street. Now, the O&W crossed New Jersey Route 302 here, just east of Crawford Junction. This is the Fair Oaks Speedway. This is part of it. One of the longest, straightest, and level sections of the railroad. What I didn't know, and even though we had a summer home in the area and traveled through here frequently, was the Erie-Lackawanna was still providing service out of Middletown to a lumberyard in Fair Oaks for several years after abandonment, all running all the way up almost to what's called M&M Road. You can see this on a USGS 1971 topo using 1961 data. I don't know when that service ended. Mr. Barbario probably knows better than I do. This is, his bailiwick. But I do remember that there were trains running in the area. We're turned around 180 degrees, and we're looking now timetable west. That's the O&W right-of-way crossing here. In fact, you can even see where the rails used to be and the asphalt. This is part of the Fair Oaks Speedway, of course. Now, this map helps to clarify it. A longer section of the O&W right-of-way north of Middletown survived past abandonment, as of course did the Pine Bush branch. So this is marked on USGS as serviced by the Erie-Lackawanna. And the lumberyard would have been just the other side of Fair Oaks Road, somewhere in here. And they kept the track far enough back, I guess, to be able to unload. So almost all the way to M&M Road. I also remember, and this I thought was crazy, a flagger stopping traffic on the Quickway in the late 1960s to allow a local freight to cross going up to Pine Bush. So you can imagine 17 is 4 lanes here with a center median, and he had to bring all of that to a halt to run a short freight train across. All right, we've gone a little bit further west, and while this looks like somebody's private driveway, it is the O&W main line in Winterton, New York. So we are standing at the crossing of the main line in Winterton Road, Route 62, looking timetable east. And the right-of-way is in really good shape here. It's not overgrown at all. Turning around the other way, now we're looking timetable west, and we can see the right-of-way pretty clearly. Somebody in the organization, the society, I'm sure knows who lives here, but there is a railroad signal here, some other memorabilia, some of it associated with the O&W. But the tracks went right this way and up here before they start the slow climbing curve up to Shawangunk Tunnel and Highview Station. So this is the end of highballing it. Now we're digging in to go up the hill. You have to see this map to appreciate the layout here. Here's Highview Station at the very bottom. And here's the beginning of the tunnel. Highview Tunnel, Shawangunk Tunnel. Here's the north bore or the west bore. And then the railroad curves to the right to follow basically the topography down gradual hill down into Summitville. And this is the Port Jervis and Monticello branch, or excuse me, well, it is the PJ&M. It's going up to Summitville to connect with the Kingston branch. So technically, it's the Kingston branch. My stepmother told me that before my grandparents bought the property in Forestburg in the early 30s, they rented a place up the top of the hill here, which would have been right off of this road. I don't know the name of the road, but right over the tunnel. And she said there were numerous accidents up here at the Fiddler's Elbow. Very, very dangerous. First of all, it was a low overpass. And she had mentioned a young man that was riding a bicycle along here, and a truck tipped over carrying acid or something at the turn, burned him alive. And of course, there's the Shawanga Lodge, which they used to go to, had a nightclub, such as it was, and a restaurant. So there was a lot of stuff going on here. And of course, in the top, they could see all the way to Beacon. It was a beautiful view. But you could hear, she said, you could hear the trains going in, coming out of the tunnel. Steam engines made a lot of noise. Highview Station, we are looking towards the tunnel, timetable west, direction north. It looks much better than it did about 20 years earlier when it was being used as a chicken coop. When I was there in 1977, it was in pretty disgusting shape. So the tracks would have run right here in the bushes. This is one of the few stations they had on the line that had this southwestern Spanish-style architecture and a tiled roof, terracotta roof. Why that is, I don't know, but they seem to like this for a few of the stations. Okay, now we're on the other side. We're looking south. The tracks will be over here somewhere. And there's an access road here, a little driveway. So when we went in, nobody was living here. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, many of the places that we went to, we can't go to anymore. You can't just walk up to them and take pictures. Or maybe we shouldn't have done that all those years ago, but we just did anyway, and nobody said anything. And the tunnel is off to our right. But the building seems to be in decent shape. And here it is, the infamous Shawangunk Tunnel with the ever-present water. This tunnel from its inception in the 1870s had a problem with water ingress. And part of the problem with the tunnel is, you'll notice on the right, all this shale. The Shawangunk area, these mountains, the Shawangunk Mountains, which are part of the Appalachian mountain chain, are lined with layers of shale. And shale is a very unstable, very soft rock that breaks apart easily. So, and you can even see at the tunnel entrance, there's some shale here. So water was a big problem, and I imagine it didn't take very long after abandonment before the tunnel flooded. And from what I understand, I've never walked through it, but some people have. It said it's pretty deep in places. My stepmother recalled going into here when she would ride the train to go up to Fallsburg and Monticello, that you had to close the windows quickly when you saw the station, because all that smoke would come back into the cars. And here we're looking into the bore. That is not the far end. That is a reflection off something, water. But look at this, layers, stratified shale. So it's a wonder that this tunnel, to be honest with you, my brother, who is also a geologist, said it's a wonder that this tunnel hasn't collapsed yet, because again, the shale is so unstable. And engineers from the state have come down to look at the tunnel and try to figure out a way to drain more of the water out of it, because they want to do work on I-86, which is the present day Quickway 17. And they're concerned about the stability of the tunnel long term. Is it going to fall apart? Is it going to collapse? That could be a real problem for the highway above it. Somebody else here may know, I don't believe there's a tunnel liner at this end. There may have been one at the other end. We did take a trip up there a number of years ago during the summer, and I think there's a small liner, but not very much. And if there is, it's probably, most of it just fallen down. All right, this is the right of way west of the tunnel. So the tunnel is behind us. We're walking towards the highway. And most of this is eroded gravel and sand, and this is basically stuff that's coming out of the tunnel and coming off the mountain. So again, the highway engineers are concerned about the stability of the tunnel. And I don't know what they can do about it, because you'd have to go through and plug it basically, or brace it. It's just hard to say how long it's going to last, but I would imagine at some point a lot of it is going to collapse because of, again, being shale. And here are the bridge abutments. This was a low bridge, low clearance bridge over not Route 71, just Route 17, Newburgh-Cohecton Turnpike. So this is where some really nasty accidents happened. And if you look at old newspaper articles, you'll hear about runaways going down the hill. You'll hear about collisions between cars and trucks, cars and cars, and again, people, you know, somebody riding a bicycle or walking getting hit. All right, the next station, Mamakatting, which is in nice shape, just west of the O&W Bridge, heading towards Summitville and the hairpin turn. It's in wonderful shape. It's now a Veterans of Foreign Wars post. I believe it still is to this day. The right-of-way outside the station is very easy to walk on. It was largely free of overgrowth in July of '97, and I believe that was because a lot of people were using it to run ATVs. So here we are on the track side. Tracks ran here. And down in the distance, you can see that that's an ATV of something, some kind of wheeled vehicle mark down there. But they do take care of the property. They cut the grass and You can even see a few ties were still here in 1997. I don't know if they're there now, but somebody clearly is taking care of it. While we were here, we decided to take a little detour down to Wurtsboro. And in general, you don't see a lot of photos of the PJ&M north of the Valley Junction. In other words, the stations going up to Kingston. You don't see a lot of pictures of them, but there's a lot of the stations. A lot of the stations still exist. In fact, there may be more stations on this piece of O&W trackage than there are on any section of the O&W anywhere else, and a lot of them are still being used. So this one at the time in 1997 was a residence, and somebody, of course, put a crossbuck down here, and here's the right-of-way. Summitville. Well, I was here many years ago when the station was still here, although it was collapsing, and of course it was burned in a controlled fire in the 80s, I believe. So the station would have been right about here somewhere. You can still see some ties here. Again, this was a small yard, and the Kingston branch went off in the back, and the tracks are running behind me to cross over 209, and 209, of course, was rerouted and made wider. So that obliterated the old bridge that used to be over 209. But it's where the main line, Kingston Branch and Port Jervis all came together. So we're looking eastbound at the Shawangunk Mountains. Now this concrete overpass was built in 1904, and there are a lot of these. You'll find these in many places along the road, and they're not coming down. They're in good shape. They're going to be there a long time. It's what we call the beginning of the Red Hill grade. So we are on Red Hill Road, just coming out of Phillipsport. We're heading west. We're going to try to follow the right-of-way as closely as we can up the hill to Mountaindale. And this is the beginning of a pretty good grade. This is pusher engine territory to get up here, to do this climb. We went up on top of the overpass. I always find this interesting, that where the ties are, it's all overgrown, or where they removed the rails when they went to single track, it's in perfect shape. Well, of course, because everybody's riding bikes up here, ATVs, and people are hiking and bicycling on it. So that's what it looks like on top. We are just this side of the Red Hill Bridge, Red Hill Road Bridge. But you can see all the ties that are still there. And this is looking timetable west. Actually, we're looking northeast at this point. We're going to begin this slow curve towards Little Falls and up towards Mountaindale. And here's Mountaindale. The station location, the station burned down and was rebuilt. And I think it was torn down eventually, just to the right of the photo. And this was where the tracks ran. So the post office was built on the O&W grade in the early 1960s. And Mountaindale, to me, is symptomatic of what happened to a lot of towns that were along the O&W and depended on it for jobs, for freight, for a lot of things, for tourists. That when the railroad went out, it sort of started a decline for many of these towns. They didn't really have a plan B. They had nothing else to fall back on. So when we visited in 1997, it was a little village that was really sleepy with lots of vacant stores. And you're going to find this happened along many places along the line when the tracks were taken up. So now we're moving west along the right-of-way. We're approaching Woodridge. This is a tennis court on somebody's property, but the right-of-way is here. So, whoops, let me do that. So the tracks are coming this way and going out the lower left corner of the picture. And parts of the right-of-way are actually paved through Woodridge. It's actually a road you can drive on. And in several places, the O&W right-of-way saw a second life as either paved or gravel roads in many towns, because roadway had been abandoned, the right-of-way had been abandoned, the tracks were gone, and the town said, well, we need a road there, and why waste it? So here's Woodridge. We are looking timetable west, and Green Street, which is the next block over, is on the old right-of-way. I don't know if these grain towers, storage towers are still in place. I don't believe they are. Woodridge originally was a stop on the O&W before there was anything here, and it was called Centerville. And then it was renamed Woodridge. And there's a little plaque here outside Woodridge Municipal Hall explaining that. So the station opened in 1911, and in 1917, the name of the village was changed to Woodridge. The right-of-way is just behind us along with the station site. Heading west from Woodridge, this is the right-of-way approaching the Neversink River Bridge. This is all sand, very sandy soil here. But the tracks are coming from Woodridge and heading towards the bridge. And this is just, people are dumping stuff back here. There are trucks back here, couple trucks past us. Some people on ATVs went flying by us. So it's being used as an access road now. Turning around, let's take a look here. Here's another one of those USGS maps from 1943. And this is now Green Street by Woods Lake. Here's Centerville, which is Woodridge. Right away takes a turn to the south here, basically following the drainage from Woods Lake into the Neversink. And then it crosses the Neversink River and then curls to the right to head up towards South Fallsburg through the Fallsburg Tunnel. So this section of the right-of-way is a much easier trip from Woodridge to South Fallsburg, Hurleyville, and even all the way to Ferndale, because it's pretty level. It's following stream beds running along ponds and lakes. The only exception being where they dug the tunnel, because they had to go through a hill. And here's a footing. So this is the east abutment of the O&W Bridge across the Neversink River. West abutment is over here. It's about halfway between Woodridge and South Fallsburg. And the head is the South Timetable East portal of Fallsburg Tunnel, which, by the way, is not all that easy to access. But these bridge abutments will be here long after we're gone, because they are made out of large blocks of stone. They've been mortared very well. They're not going anyplace. And here it is, Fallsburg Tunnel. Now, unlike Shawangunk, which looks like a crudely hewn tunnel, which could collapse at any moment, Fallsburg is actually a lot more stable. You don't have layers of shale here. You have bedrock. And you have a stone tunnel facing, and you have a tunnel liner going in quite a ways at both ends. So you can walk through this tunnel. You'll run into some water. I mean, it's inevitable you're going to have water here because it's a tunnel and it's below the mountain, so it's going to get drainage. But you can get to it by parking on Tunnel Hill Road. If you can find a place where you're not going to get hit by another car and hiking down a very steep incline. It is a really steep incline up here. So you need good hiking shoes and need to move slowly to get down to it. There's a closer look at the portal. And again, unlike Shawangunk, which is really dangerous, you can walk through this with waterproof boots. Now, I don't know where all of this, where all this stone is coming from, unless it's probably from the liner or just the other inside of the liner. Some of that stone has come down. But you can see that the stone here, the blocks, keystone, everything is in good shape. The mortar is in good shape. So this tunnel is going to be here for a while. Here's Ross standing at the tunnel. I said, hey, you want to go through it? We started walking in a little bit, and he said, no, you know what? I don't, because it's pretty dark in there. And all you can see is the other end of the tunnel. We didn't have flashlights, but we did venture in a ways. And of course, you're going to see rocks, water, lots of old tires people throw in here and trash, which is really sad. You could make this into a trail if you wanted to. I mean, there's actually a trail on the other side, starting in Fallsburg. There's probably some liability issues that would need to be addressed, but you could make this into a trail and walk this all the way to the Neversink River. And if somebody really wanted to, they could put a walking bridge across the Neversink River and extend the trail into Woodridge. So the easier way to get the tunnel is to go all the way over Tunnel Hill Road and into South Fallsburg. So now we're standing on the old right-of-way looking back this direction. This is where the tunnel is. And that portal's a lot easier to get to. You can almost drive right up to it. Lake Street runs alongside the right-of-way from the tunnel to here. So this is Railroad Plaza, and the South Fallsburg station is still in use by the village. And there it is. It's in great shape. As of 2023, it was repurposed as the Town of Fallsburg Police Department and Fallsburg Justice Court. So again, very few of the O&W stations survive in usable condition. There's quite a few of them out there. They're not usable. They need restoration, but this one is in great shape. And the right-of-way ran right here. If you look at old pictures of people at South Fallsburg Station, you will recognize this building. No trip to South Fallsburg would be complete without a trip down to Monticello, the Sullivan County seat, which is the station. And the story has it that when the O&W bypassed them and ran through South Fallsburg, residents of Monticello said, wait, this is Sullivan County seat. You can't have a train running by us without service to our town. So at one point, there was a branch line proposed to be built to South Fallsburg from here, but it never happened. So the only connection that they did have is when the port service in Monticello was built, which of course is a lot longer trip. Coming on the O&W main line probably would have been a lot shorter. This building now is Van Etten Energy Systems, Van Etten Oil. They occupied the station site very shortly after abandonment. They took it over. You can still see the platforms intact. We got our oil from these guys. We got our propane from these guys. And I was in there one time. They let me walk around and look up in the attic and everything. They found all kinds of O&W ephemera, paper, and other things up in the attic when they took over the building. And I don't know where it all went, but it would have been nice to get our hands on some of it. So the building is still in use, and I am sure it will be in use for a long time. They are taking care of it. Now, we decided not to follow the right-of-way through Hurley and Luzon State. Well, it's Luzon Station, but Hurley. So we jumped on 17 and went over to Ferndale. So at this point, we are standing just west or just east of the Ferndale Trestle over the Monticello River. New York 17 I-86 severed the right-of-way just east of here. This is the station site. Station's been repurposed as County Petroleum Products in 2023. So the tracks curve north to cross the trestle at this point after crossing what became I-17. Then he did a big hook to the north to jump across the Monticello River. A map would be useful here, so I'm going to show it to you. So here we are. Here's the right-of-way coming from Hurley, and it heads west, and it curls around. And Ferndale Station's right about here, just before the trestle. And there's the big trestle across the Monticello as it winds away along the side of the hill to get into Liberty. Once you get across the trestle, the right-of-way's there. The station burned down in Liberty in the 80s, but you can hike it. It's actually a rail trail, and we rode bikes on it, which is a little bit more strenuous than I expected, but it is in good shape. And then the right-of-way, of course, curls around Liberty and heads up the hills towards Young's Gap, which was the highest point on the line. So here we are in Liberty. This building has been photographed many times. Liberty Freight House survives today. It's maintained and used by New York State Electric and Gas. It's in wonderful shape. You can still see the doors to the freight house. Somebody's maintaining them. I don't know what they look like today, but I would bet they're in good shape. So the right-of-way is now called the Liberty Rail Trail. It starts at the west buttress of Ferndale Trestle, and it goes all the way to Hill Street. And then the right-of-way continues as State Street west of there. It's actually paved over. As I said earlier, some of the right-of-way was recycled and repurposed as roads. So you can take this all the way down to the edge of the Ferndale Trestle. And if you're a little bit ambitious, you can walk down the hill a ways and you can see the footings for the trestle bents and trestle supports. Now we're standing at the intersection of State Street and Lake Street looking west. The Liberty Station site was to the right. Now there's an agway here. By the way, for many people, if you're ever looking to see where a railroad ran at one time, look for an agway or a propane distributor, because quite often there were tracks. That's how they got the propane in. And in many cases, the tracks were taken out and the propane distributor remained there. But more often than not, that's either where a railroad ran or a siding ran to get to it. So Liberty Station is where numerous summer tourists disembark to go to the Borscht Belt hotels like Rosinger's. At the end of State Street, the trail resumes and terminates at Chestnut Street. So we're looking east from the end of State Street towards the station site, and the freight house is way off in the distance. But this is an O&W built retaining wall right here. That's original O&W. That was not anything put in when the road was, all they did here was just basically, once the ties were removed, do a little grading and just put some gravel or pavement down, which of course is breaking up. Now, in 1997, we reached the end of the walkable, drivable right-of-way west of Chestnut Street. But the right-of-way west of here has been obliterated by the new expanded campus of Liberty High School. We did a really beautiful job with it. But I mean, if you were looking for traces of the O&W past here, forget it. Once you get up here, the high school basically wiped it out. If you look on a topo map, though, you can see the right-of-way, again, north of the high school football field. Those scars are going to be there for a long time. And often it's because there are trees growing on them and there's no trees either side of the right-of-way. The right-of-way is curling slowly northeast across Old New York 17 as it approaches Young's Gap. And here we are, just about at Young's Gap, walking on what's left of the tracks. This area was known for epic snow accumulation. And when I say epic, I mean epic. You look at some of the pictures and the snow drifts are higher than the engine. But that was the late 1800s, early 1900s. Today, they hardly get any snow at all up there. It's not unusual to come up here in January and February and have the ground be bare. I found this postcard on livingstonmanor.net. Harold Aiken posted it, and I found it fascinating because if you look over here, you can see there's the O&W. The track's curling this way. They're going up on their way up to Young's Gap. But here's the New Liberty bypass. So there's no photo credit or photo date on this, but my brother would know better. This was his bread and butter was to know this stuff. But I'm assuming that this is around 1959, 1960. I don't know when these tracks were scrapped. This may have been one of the last sections to be scrapped. But this highway was built, I believe, in 1959, 1960. I would have to go back and look. I have some old New York State highway gas station maps that do show the Quickway. So this is the first section of the Quickway, but at the time it was called the Liberty Bypass. Unfortunately, removing the tracks, taking the train out of Liberty, and then building this, really, and nobody thought about it at the time, was kind of like signing, not a death warrant, but putting Liberty Manor, or Liberty rather, into a slow and continued decline because people didn't need to stop in Liberty anymore. They bypassed it and the trains didn't stop there anymore. Here we are in Parksville. That is a really low bridge clearance. Okay, you can walk through that and your head just about clears it. It carries the O&W over a small creek by short road, but now this is a ramp up to the highway. So a number of years ago, I-17, I-86 was rerouted to the south of Parksville and obliterated again more of the O&W right away, especially going towards Fox Hill Road. There was a long section of it there where you could clearly see the right of way up on a berm. That's all gone. The reason they did this is because you can't have traffic lights on an interstate highway, and 17 had a traffic light in Parksville. So this is all changed. Still the O&W rail trail though. A little bit further up the line, Livingston Manor Station. It's been gone a long time. A cluster of new buildings occupy the old yard, but the freight house was still standing in 1997. Now, it looks pretty weather beaten and like it's falling apart, but it has a new roof on it. That I didn't understand, and the tracks ran right here. So Dubois Road runs alongside the old right-of-way east of Main Street, once a very busy place on the O&W. This was a, I don't say division point, but this is where a lot of the helper engines were parked to get trains up and over Young's Gap. There's another look at that same freight house looking westbound. So again, it is in deteriorated condition, but the roof is in reasonably good condition. And you can spot it on Google Maps. You can't see it too clearly from the highway. It's behind a telephone company switching office. We have a friend who lives in Marston. He used to run a bed and breakfast there, and he remembers standing on his front porch and waving to the diesels crossing Old Liberty Road, and the conductors would wave back. Is it just the other side of Old Liberty Road? He could see the trains very clearly from his front porch. He also remembers walking the tracks into town at night in the 50s and going across that bridge over the Little Beaver Kill in a hurry to make sure that no trains were coming by and catch him out on the trestle. Now, after that relatively easy trip to get through Liberty and then up over Young's Gap, you'll find that the right-of-way crosses the Willowemoc 5 times. The Little Beaver Kill comes in here from Morriston, and now we're at the Willowemoc. Crosses it 5 times between Livingston Manor and Roscoe. So it stands to reason you could see some of the stone pillars and abutments, and you do. If you're careful and you're driving on Old 17 in the Quickway, you look quickly. When you cross the Willowemoc, you will see bridge abutments. An area called Hazel, which is a few houses laid about halfway between the two villages. There's really just a rest area there now. If you go into the rest area and you go behind the rest area and you walk all the way to the Willowemoc, you'll see this, a collapsing bridge support. It looks like it was originally built with individual stones and later encased in concrete. So that would mean its construction dates all the way back to the Oswego Midland. And you can see the stones right there. So there they are. So what the O&W did is they basically poured concrete around the stones to stabilize it, which, of course, without a bridge on top of it providing any weight and flooding that happens in the area, it's slowly tipping over. The right-of-way grade was higher here, though, than the Willowemoc, and it was removed to build the rest area in the parking lot. And now we're in Westfield Flats, or Roscoe. In Roscoe, the highway was built mostly on top of the O&W right-of-way. So you don't really have any traces of it remaining. This is the old station site on Railroad Avenue at Stewart Avenue, where the O&W Museum is. It was one of those ubiquitous, eerie cabooses that you find all over the place. There's one outside Livingston Manor. There's one in Acorn, repurposed as O&W hacks. And they also have an O&W trout car here, a restored trout car. It was a coach that was used to bring trout to stock the Willowemoc Little Beaver Kill in the East Branch of the Delaware River. There may have been other roads that did this. I don't know of too many, but this was something that the O&W was well known for. There's a wigwag station, a wigwag signal from the Roscoe station sitting outside the museum. There's a small watchman's shanty, signalman shanty. New York 17 I-86 was elevated quite a bit of above the old right-of-way when it was constructed. So heading west on Old 17, not on the quick way, we see a fly fisherman. This is where they all go. Roscoe is considered to be the trout capital of the U.S. That's the O&W right-of-way on the ledge behind him. So I just could imagine, close my eyes and imagine sitting here, standing in the water, tossing your fly, casting your flies, while a big freight led by a 482 Mountain rumbled by in the background. Now here's a place you can't visit anymore. At least I was told you can't go by it. But again, we just went right up to it. This is the lone surviving O&W through truss bridge over the Beaver Kill at milepost 139, it's bridge 153. It's a private drive now to Landfield Hollow. If you look on a topo map, you will see that there's one house there in the middle of a huge empty field. The bridge is in great shape because there's very little maintenance has been done on it. I don't know when the last time was it was sanded and painted. But you can see somebody redecked it and cars can drive over it. From the O&W in Color book and some other books by Mr. Mahowski, it's referred to as Hairpin Bridge. As a nearby structure housed two women who it was said were in a constant state of physical conflict. Well, a little bit further west, you're in Cooks Falls, and the station at Cooks Falls is in very nice shape. It was being used as a summer residence in 1997. And that's the right-of-way in front of it, which has been repurposed as a local road. In this part of Delaware County, several sections of the O&W were repurposed. This is a stone retaining wall, which is pretty impressive. The right-of-way is right up here. And this was built to stabilize the hill after one of the many floods in the Delaware eroded the fill. A girder bridge still spans a creek just to the left of the picture. It can be seen from across the river. That's for road access. That has nothing to do with the railroad. Now we're heading towards East Branch, and this is O&W Road. They actually named it O&W Road. It's a repurposed section of the right-of-way. Stone retaining wall from the right. This goes back to the Oswego Midland. It's very old. You can see moss growing on it. There's plenty of room for two tracks here. We're on our way to Fish's Eddy and ultimately Cadocia, looking eastbound here towards East Branch. We crossed the bridge across the East Branch of the Delaware River to show you this. This is a bridge abutment for what was called the Delaware and Northern, or to the locals, the Dam Nuisance. It was a short line built from here to Margaretville. It was built in the early 1900s. Had a lot of used locomotives from at least one or two of them from the ex-Lackawanna, and a Sykes rail bus. Never really had a lot of passengers on it. Struggled to survive. The Depression took out a lot of railroads, and it was in bad shape. And it was actually bought by one of the contractors that helped build Downsville Reservoir, and it was used to bring in materials to build the reservoir, which of course flooded a great deal of the valley where the Delaware and Northern ran. So there were several towns there that are underwater now. They knocked down the buildings, they moved all the graves out of the cemeteries, got rid of as much as they could, and then they flooded Downsville Reservoir, and all of that is gone. But this is a bridge abutment from the D&N. Here's what it looked like back in 1943. Here's the O&W coming from Cooks Falls, and there is the D&N, Delaware and Northern, heading north on Route 30 towards Downsville. And we have a little Y here to connect at East Branch to the O&W. It's not doing too much river jumping anymore. It's pretty much following the contours of the land across Early's Flat, near Reed Flat, and then right down here at Fish's Eddy, it jumps one more time. And we had Mark had a great presentation on the bridge collapse that happened there. And this, I believe, is the repurposed O&W Truss Bridge that is now Highway Bridge. They replaced an earlier structure. You notice that you have wider bridge pilings here to the left. The original Highway Bridge was destroyed during a flood, and the road was relocated to this bridge. So it was recycled, and it's in good shape. Somebody's been sanding it and painting it and taking care of it. And that was where the old Highway Bridge was. That's all that survives from it. It was taken out in the flood. The O&W Truss Bridge just south of it replaced the Highway Bridge, is now County Highway 28. This is a little newer map, late 40s. Let's go up here. Here's Fish's Eddy. And we are now following the north side of the Delaware River, and then we're going to cut through Hawk Mountain. Because I guess they just decided it was totally impractical to go all the way down here, hug the mountain, go up Green Flats to get to Godosha. They just decided to cut through completely, even though the old 17 did head to the south and then back into Godosha. And here's Hancock. Here's the line running to Hancock and then crossing the Delaware River on the Scranton branch to head south. Hawk Mountain, of course, is long gone, totally obliterated when 17 was built. They blasted the mountain away and just buried it. So we're at Godosha. We've reached the end of our trip, at least the first leg of it. We're standing in front of Godosha Station. It's had many uses over the years. I've seen it used as a florist shop. It was a nightclub and a restaurant. And when we were here in 1997, it was boarded up. I don't know what anybody was using it for. Most of it was closed up. Somebody might have been living here. A large yard once existed here. It was the division point for the Scranton and the Northern Division, between Scranton and the Northern Division. There's a side view of it. We're standing about where the yard tracks were, with Hawk Mountain Tunnel behind us. And we are looking direction north, timetable westbound towards Apex and Walton, which was another busy yard for the O&W. And we ventured a little bit further west to see what was left of the footings for that long trestle that went over the Delaware River and onto Scranton down to Mayfield Yard. So on this side of the highway, all that remains is this enormous concrete footing. And it was built to support 2 tracks of long coal drags behind bull moose engines. So it was built to last, and it's lasting very nicely. All right, now Ellenville to Kingston. We went back to Summitville a year later, started north. Here's Ellenville Station. It survived. It's seen many different uses after abandonment. It was being used as an antique shop recently. There was an article in the New York Times about it, that they have a lot of antiques in there from Broadway shows and props that are used for movies. I don't know who was using it at the time that we were there. It looked like part of it was a residence. The tracks ran in front here, continued north on an easy grade, passing the Channel Master factory just outside of town. So when we visited, it appeared to be in use for storage, or either an office or residential building. So on this side, probably storage. On the south side, it looked like somebody was living there. The roof was in great shape. The sides had been shingled, like shake shingles. Here, the right-of-way parallels the D&H Canal and Sandberg Creek through the village of Ellenville. And here's the south side. So I think this may have been a residence at the time or somebody's office, and likely completely remodeled inside. This was once a very busy yard and station because a lot of the northeastern Catskill resorts were close by here. So in addition to Liberty, Monticello, let's say South Fallsburg, and Liberty being two of the busier stations for the Borscht Belt. This was another one that took guests to hotels. Heading north out of Ellenville, Napanoch. You know this was restored. I think this was a project where they used inmates from the correctional facility to do some of the work. So this is what it looked like in 1997. I went there for the dedication a number of years ago, and it's in really, really beautiful shape inside. Looks brand new. The correctional facility, interestingly enough, listed on topo maps is the Napanoch Institute for Mental Delinquents. You wouldn't hear people say that today. We don't call them that. The D&H Canal Rondout Creek to the right. Here's a south view of it before restoration. Of course, there's the prison behind, but you can see this, the Napanoch Institute for Mental Delinquents. So at this point, the railroad is basically hugging the Rondout Creek and what's left of the D&H Canal all the way into Kingston, or at least as far as High Falls. Heading a little bit further north, we're at Warsing. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is in great shape, or at least it was in 1997. I had no idea what they're using the building for. It was completely closed up, but somebody had painted it. Somebody put a new roof on it. This is the view from the street side. This is where carriages pulled up to pick up passengers and drop off passengers for the train. It's a gravel road, bit of the hike from the center of the village. So we're here at our track side. There's the little freight door, and here's where passengers would have waited for the train. Probably some sort of platform here. Of course, it's long gone now, and the track bed is covered in weeds. And the opposite side of the right-of-way is Rondout Creek, just to the right of the picture. It's a bit of a jungle here, actually. You don't really want to walk through this. There's a lot of poison ivy and brambles and everything. But this is up by where the passengers were, and the freight door was down there. So judging from timetables I've seen and anecdotal evidence, this was not really a very busy station on the line. Probably one of the first stations that they closed when they started to cut back on expenses. Now, you're better than me if you can find any remnants of the O&W in downtown Kerhonkson. The right-of-way is basically right here, running in front of these buildings. Whoops. Running in front of these buildings. We're looking north. Trains ran into the woods at the middle right on the gravel road, and it's now the O&W rail trail to Acord. My brother was one of the people instrumental in getting that trail built, and I see over the years they keep adding sections to it. So it looks like a good part of the Kingston branch will just become a public hiking trail. I've often joked that you can go into the smallest towns in New York, and you will hardly see anything there, but you'll always see a pizza parlor and a hair and nail salon. So there's a pizza parlor here and a hair and nail salon next to it. Okay, now we're at the end of the downtown area, and we're looking timetable eastbound, which is north. The O&W right-of-way has been paved over, and the next segment of the O&W rail trail starts at the end. This is Main Street. So at the end of Main Street is where the rail trail starts. The whole time Ross and I were in downtown Kerhonkson, such as it is, we didn't see a single car. Didn't hear anything. Didn't see anybody in the pizza place or the hair and nail salon. It was just weirdly quiet. The O&W heading north jumps Rondout Creek and heads to Acord. Not Accord, Acord. At least that's what the locals told me on its way to Kingston. Back in 1997, the station was in great shape when we visited, although the shop was closed. It's being used as a delicatessen. Here's another one of those ubiquitous Erie cabooses posing as O&W 8311 on a short length of rail outside the deli. Ross was fascinated with the caboose. They did a little bit of restoration inside, but locked up and inaccessible to the public. I don't know if those rails are actually where the tracks ran. I think they're just arbitrary so they can put the caboose on it. Looking across the road, this is a feed mill. Back in the day, these people sold everything. So a dealer would sell feed, coal, lumber, bulk items, cement, sand, gravel, whatever you needed. The right-of-way is running right here, right in front of the building. So I have no doubt that this was serviced by the O&W. This is probably one of their customers online. Continuing north, here's High Falls Station. High Falls is the Rondout Creek where it turns east and then heads north again to go through Kingston. There's quite a waterfall here. The building was in great shape when we visited. We didn't walk up to it, but you could see it from the road. It's a residence. They have put a nice fence up here. They're landscaping the grounds in exceptionally good shape. The trains ran right here, right in front of the station. Remember what I said earlier about there are a lot of stations that survive on the Kingston branch, maybe more per mile or every 10 miles than you'll find anywhere else on the O&W. And our next stop is Cottikill. And this is actually somebody's home, and they are taking care of it, and it's on the O&W rail trail. So the rail trail runs through their yard, and they're good with that, apparently. I hiked it. My wife and I rode our bikes on it. We're looking northeast here, timetable east. The right-of-way parallels Cottikill Creek for a short distance. Then it turns northeast to begin a slow descent down to Route 209. The rail trail runs all the way to Hurley and actually continues into Kingston, but there's a short break in it. This structure stands across from Cottikill. This particular area is near Rosendale, and Rosendale is well known for cement. Turn of the century into the 20s and 30s, there were numerous companies that were extracting and milling and making Rosendale cement. Limestone and other ingredients mixed and sold cement by the bag and hopper. This is what it was known for, the cement district. So these are likely cement hoppers. That's what's being stored here. The tracks ran right here. It's entirely possible that they could be loading cement into hopper cars from these towers. Nobody was around to explain it. I don't know if these are still here, but they do tower over the Cottikill station. Of course, no trip to Rosendale area is complete without a trip to Rosendale itself to see the famous 940-foot tall Wallkill Valley, New York Central Rosendale Trestle. It's still there, part of the 24-mile Wallkill Rail Trail from Gardner to Kingston. It was built in 1872. When it was first tested, they pushed a couple of engines out on it really, really slowly with only a few people on it in case it collapsed, but no, it held up. And it lasted a long time. And Conrail, Penn Central ran trains over it. Conrail may have even run a few trains over it, but eventually, because it was such a maintenance headache, Conrail took it out of service. And according to my brother, they sold it for $1 just to get it off the tax rolls. And a guy was going to use it as a bungee jumping platform, which apparently never happened. But here we are up on it. When we visited it, only half of it was open. There's a fence right below the picture frame here, but this is looking north towards Kingston. But today there are railings on both sides. The deck has been completely restored. It sits 150 feet above Rondout Creek, the Delaware and Hudson Canal in New York, Route 213. Now, as we head south from Cottikill, we come to Route 209, and this is where the rail trail starts, or at least it's broken in half here by 209. As I said, my brother was a planner, very active, lived in Stone Ridge and Marbletown, very active in getting this trail cleared and dedicated back in the 1990s. So the game plan is to connect all the sections so you'll be able to walk from Kingston all the way to Ellenville or ride a bike or whatever you choose to do. And it's happening. It's happening in bits and pieces, but it is happening. This is the sign and the beginning of the trail as we saw it back in 1997. At the time, it was only 3.1 miles long. Of course, it's been extended considerably since then. But the goal was to get it, if you look on the map, to go from Kingston all the way down to Spring Glen, just south of Ellenville. Now we're looking north, timetable east at the O&W rail trail head. 209 is to the left, and the right-of-way ran right where I'm standing. So one of the first things we wondered is, well, why is the grass cut? Why is somebody maintaining it? And why is it so wide here? Was this kept wide because the railroad was still in service? But no, according to my brother, New York State at one time wanted to widen Route 209. Route 209 ran much closer to Kingston at one time, and it was pushed further west and to turn into kind of an express highway. And they were going to widen the road and clear the shoulder all the way to the trees, but they never went through with the project. You can see here what that looked like. So the Main Street overpass going into Hurley is clearly wide enough for a railroad right away. And I was convinced that's what it was. And he said, nope. He said, this was supposed to be 4 lanes through here, and it just never happened. Because actually what's happening is the right of way is crossing under 209. and going to our left into Hurley. So 209, when it was rerouted and widened, wiped out the right-of-way. This is the old Route 209 on Hurley Avenue. It was just a 2-lane road, and that's the right-of-way coming from Hurley. So it's coming right at us. And right about here, it curved to the right, and it followed the road into Kingston, paralleling the Ulster and Delaware tracks. So in this case, the right-of-way is being used as a power line right-of-way. Now, in 1955, when the thruway was under construction, the O&W was still very much in operation. So we have a couple of underpasses that were built. One of them, of course, right after Rosendale Trestle, where the O&W climbs up towards Meadowbrook, and you can still walk under that. That was built in 1955 and 56, and then they built one here for the Kingston branch. Now, if you go on the O&W virtual bus tour, you'll see an FT crossing over here, but to my knowledge, they never ran FTs on the Kingston branch. Now, somebody can correct me on that, but my understanding was that the F units never ran all the way up here. It was NW2s and the smaller switchers, and of course, smaller steam locomotives. Now we're looking behind us is the thruway. We're looking east towards Kingston. This is in a little bit better shape now because it is the O&W rail trail. So it has been, the grass has been cut. Some stuff's been put down to hold the trail shape. The Ulster Delaware tracks are just a few feet to the north, running parallel, right over here, just outside the frame. And you could almost reach over and touch them, and there they are, heading towards Kingston. And this is the end of the line. You never know there was a station here. The Ames and all this sign, this is on O&W, what used to be O&W property. The O&W interchange with the Ulster and Delaware across the street once it crossed Washington Avenue. There's a very famous picture of 9 NW2 road switchers that were delivered to the New York Central, and they're coming off the O&W and they're going on to just the other side here. They're going on to the Ulster and Delaware. There's a little interchange yard here. And that is all that remains of the O&W after 40 years after abandonment. This little concrete pad, I'm not sure what it is, but the station was about here. The UND tracks are right there in the grass. They've since been cleaned out because the Catskill Mountain Railroad uses them. They're running all the way up to Ashokan Reservoir, just about to Ashokan Reservoir. But there was an interchange yard just east of Washington Street. And I'm not sure when the station was taken out of service. Well, I can tell you it doesn't show up on this topo map from 1943. So here is the O&W right-of-way coming from Hurley, making that gradual turn. And by the way, this dashed line is roughly where the thruway is. Dashed line does not designate where they were going to put the thruway, but that's roughly where the thruway runs. So here's the Ulster and Delaware, and they're running right next to each other. Just a stone's throw away, and then here's the yard. So this is where the interchange took place. You also interchange in the New York Central in places like Utica, Rome, and Fulton. So it's been 66 years since the O&W was shut down. Aside from short pieces of track in Middletown, Utica, and a stretch from Fulton to Oswego, there's only a few stations, a bridge here and there, 3 tunnels, and numerous concrete abutments. That's all that remains of the old woman. Much of the right-of-way we explored back then is overgrown, except for ATV trails and public roads. And in some cases, the ATV guys are the ones preserving the right-of-way. Otherwise, it would just be overgrown with trees. The realignment of I-86 basically wiped out more of the right-of-way through Parksville. Some of the buildings have been torn down, burned down, and relocated. Some have been restored and maintained. So I guess my question is, after we did this, what's going to be left of the O&W 25 years from now? That concludes my presentation.